Hi, I'm a 29-year-old guy, and this story involves my family, who I'd describe as close but exhausting at times. Growing up, we were the typical family with UPS and downs, but as I've gotten older, it's become clear that the dynamics are far from balanced. My mom is the self-appointed matriarch, and she thrives on being involved in everything. She has a knack for micromanaging even when it's not needed or wanted. Then there's my older sister, Rachel. She's 32 and has always been the golden child. Rachel's the type who can do no wrong in mom's eyes. My younger brother, Eric, is 26, and he's the opposite. He stays neutral in most situations, avoiding drama whenever possible. I've always felt stuck in the middle, never quite measuring up to Rachel's perfection, but also not coasting through life as easily as Eric seems to. Recently, my dad retired and mom decided to throw a family gathering to celebrate. She didn't ask for input, she declared it was happening, and that was that. It's her style to control every detail, and she made sure to remind us all repeatedly about the date, time, and how important it was for everyone to be on their best behavior. I've been to enough family events to know that best behavior means don't make mom look bad. The days leading up to the party were tense. Mom has a habit of calling me and Rachel separately to talk about each other, and this time was no different. She mentioned how Rachel had found the perfect gifters for Dad and then asked me what I was bringing. When I told her I'd been working on a scrapbook of Dad's career highlights, she gave a long pause before saying, "Well, I'm sure he'll appreciate the effort." Translation, it's not good enough. Rachel's gift turned out to be an expensive watch. Mom couldn't stop gushing about it, and I already felt the comparisons brewing before the party even started. When the day of the gathering arrived, I was running a little late. Not because I wanted to be, but because I spent extra time making sure my gift was perfect. When I walked into my parents' house, I was greeted with smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. Mom was the first to comment, casually mentioning that everyone else had been on time. I let it slide, as I always do, and handed over my gift to be placed with the others. The atmosphere was what you'd expect, polite chit-chat covering a layer of unspoken tension. Rachel and Eric were already there, and Rachel, as usual, had positioned herself as Mom's right-hand helper. Eric was sitting off to the side, scrolling on his phone, probably trying to stay invisible. We had dinner, which Mom made sure to remind us she'd prepared from scratch, and then it was time for the gifts. Rachel's watch was presented first. It came in a sleek box, and Mom made sure everyone knew how much thought Rachel had put into choosing it. Dad thanked her and put it on immediately, which drew a round of applause from the table. Then it was my turn. I handed over the scrapbook, explaining that it was filled with pictures, newspaper clippings, and little notes from people Dad had worked with over the years. Dad looked genuinely touched as he flipped through the pages, but Mom's expression said it all. She smiled tightly and said, "It's very sentimental." Not exactly the enthusiastic praise Rachel's gift received. After the gifts, things took a strange turn. Mom suddenly announced that an envelope with $500 cash, which was apparently part of Rachel's gift, was missing. She made a big deal about how it had been sitting in the kitchen earlier, but was now nowhere to be found. Everyone started looking around, but it was clear from her tone who she thought was responsible. Mom casually mentioned my history with money problems, referring to a rough patch I'd had during college when I needed a loan from my parents. She didn't outright accuse me, but the implication was loud enough for everyone to hear. Rachel didn't help matters. She chimed in, saying how odd it was that I'd seemed nervous when I arrived. Eric stayed quiet, but I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. I was stunned. I hadn't even touched the envelope. Heck, I didn't even know it existed until Mom brought it up. I pointed out that I had only brought my wrapped gift and didn't have any opportunity to take anything. But Mom wasn't letting up. She kept saying she just knew the money was gone and that it had to be me. The room felt heavy with suspicion. I could see my dad looking uncomfortable, but he didn't speak up to defend me. Rachel kept throwing in comments like, "It's just so unfortunate," which only made things worse. At this point, I realized I wasn't going to convince anyone with words alone. I needed proof, and thankfully I had it. I pulled out my phone, ready to show exactly where I'd been and what I'd done the entire day. Update 1. The room was dead quiet except for the sound of my phone unlocking. All eyes were on me as I stood up and calmly asked everyone to sit down. It was clear that this accusation wasn't going to go away on its own, so I decided to address it head-on. Mom immediately tried to brush it off, saying we didn't need to make a big deal out of this, but I wasn't going to let her dismiss the situation. If she wanted to accuse me in front of everyone, then we were going to handle this in front of everyone. I started by opening my budgeting app. For the past year, I'd been using it religiously to track every single expense. It wasn't something I thought would ever come in handy for something like this, but it was about to save me. I showed everyone my purchases from earlier that day, a quick grocery run in the morning and gas for my car. There was nothing unaccounted for, and no big gaps of time that couldn't be explained. I also pulled up my bank app to show that my accounts were all in order. Nothing about my finances screamed desperate enough to steal. But I didn't stop there. I pulled up my phone's location history. It showed that I had driven straight from my apartment to my parents' house with no stops in between. There was no way I could have taken the envelope without being caught on camera somewhere or leaving a trail. I showed them the timestamps and GPS points, making it clear that I hadn't done anything shady. Eric, who had been quiet up until this point, finally spoke up. He said the evidence looked solid and that he didn't see how I could have taken anything. A couple of cousins murmured in agreement. For a moment, it seemed like the tide was turning in my favor. But Mom wasn't ready to let it go. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said that receipts and GPS tracking didn't prove anything. She said it wasn't about the money, it was about how I'd always been sneaky, and that this kind of behavior wasn't out of character for me. Rachel jumped in to back her up, saying I was acting weirdly defensive, and that it made me look guilty. That was the final straw. I stood my ground and made it clear that I wasn't being defensive. I was defending myself from a baseless accusation. If they were going to accuse me of something this serious, then they needed actual proof, not just mom's gut feeling. At this point, Dad, who had been mostly quiet, finally stepped in. He asked Mom and Rachel directly if they were sure the envelope was even missing, and if they had any real evidence that I was involved. Rachel hesitated before admitting that she had handed the envelope to Mom earlier in the day for safekeeping. Everyone turned to Mom, waiting for an explanation. Mom seemed caught off guard but reluctantly agreed to search for the envelope. She suggested we all split up and check different parts of the house. So that's what we did. People started looking through drawers, under cushions, and even in the trash. I wasn't convinced the envelope was missing in the first place, so I kept an eye on Mom as we searched. It didn't take long for me to notice something strange. Mom was hovering near her purse, glancing around like she didn't want anyone to notice. She opened it just a crack, peeked inside, and then quickly zipped it shut again. My gut told me to check it out. I walked over and spotted the edge of a white envelope sticking out of the side pocket. I reached for it and pulled it out, holding it up for everyone to see. It was the missing envelope, complete with Rachel's handwriting on the front. The room went completely silent. Mom's face turned red as she stammered out an excuse. She said she must have put it in her purse earlier and forgotten about it. It didn't add up. If she'd had the envelope the whole time, why accuse me of stealing it? Rachel looked stunned, but she didn't say much. It was like she didn't know what to believe anymore. Everyone was too shocked to say anything at first. Eric gave me a look that said, "I knew it wasn't you," and a couple of cousins shook their heads in disbelief. Dad looked disappointed, but I couldn't tell if it was aimed at Mom or just the situation in general. I didn't stick around long after that. I told them I was leaving and grabbed my things. As I walked out, I could hear Mom trying to explain herself, but I didn't stay to listen. I was done with the whole scene. By the time I got to my car, the weight of everything hit me. I'd proven my innocence, but it didn't feel like a victory. I'd been accused of something awful, not by strangers, but by my own family. And even after finding the envelope, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Something told me the fallout from this night was just getting started. Update 2. After leaving the party, I spent the rest of the evening replaying everything that had happened. Part of me wondered if I'd overreacted by leaving, but every time I thought about Mom accusing me in front of everyone, I couldn't shake the frustration. I'd proven my innocence, but the damage was already done. It wasn't about the envelope anymore, it was about trust, or the lack of it. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Eric. He rarely gets involved in family drama, so I was surprised when he reached out. He said he thought the way Mom handled things was completely out of line, and that I'd been right to defend myself. He didn't have much else to say, but even that small gesture felt like support I wasn't expecting. Rachel, on the other hand, was a different story. I don't follow her on social media, but one of my cousins sent me a screenshot of her latest post. It was one of those vague, passive-aggressive updates about how family drama ruins special moments and how some people can't let things go. She didn't name names, but it was obvious who she was talking about. I decided to ignore it and move on, but Mom wasn't about to let me do that. She texted me later in the day, saying that the whole thing was a misunderstanding and that I'd overreacted by walking out. She went on about how I'd made a scene and embarrassed her in front of the family. It was classic Mom, twisting the situation to make herself the victim. I didn't bother responding. Dad's silence was what surprised me the most. Usually he tries to smooth things over when Mom goes too far, but I hadn't heard a word from him. I wasn't sure if he was avoiding the situation or just didn't know what to say. Either way, it left me feeling like I was on my own. I talked it over with a few close friends who didn't hesitate to call the whole thing ridiculous. One of them even joked that I should have recorded the entire interaction and uploaded it online. They helped me see that my frustration was valid and that I wasn't wrong for standing up for myself. Later that week, I started hearing from other family members who were at the gathering. A few cousins texted me to say they couldn't believe what happened and that they supported me. One even mentioned how awkward it had been when Mom accused me, especially since I'd clearly been innocent. It felt good to know some people in the family were on my side, but it also made me realize how fractured things had become. Then Rachel called. I didn't want to pick up, but I figured avoiding her would just make things worse. She didn't waste any time accusing me of embarrassing Mom on purpose. She went on about how Mom had just been stressed and how I'd taken things too far by leaving. I stayed calm and told her I wasn't going to tolerate this kind of gaslighting. She tried to argue, but I ended the call before she could say much else. Not long after, I started hearing from more extended family members. Apparently, Mom was spreading her own version of events, painting me as vindictive and saying I'd used the envelope situation as an excuse to humiliate her. It was frustrating, but I didn't feel the need to respond. If people wanted to believe her, that was their choice. A couple of days later, Dad finally called. He started by apologizing for not stepping in during the party, saying he didn't want to make things worse in the moment. Then he asked if I could find it in me to be the bigger person and move past it for the sake of the family. I told him I wasn't interested in pretending everything was fine just to keep the peace. I made it clear that I wouldn't attend any future gatherings unless Mom apologized and made an effort to change. He sounded disappointed but didn't push the issue. Feeling overwhelmed, I decided to share the story online. I didn't name anyone or include identifying details, but I needed a place to vent. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people commented, sharing their own stories of toxic family dynamics and offering support. It was validating to see so many strangers understand where I was coming from. As I read through the comments, I started to rethink my relationship with my family. I wasn't ready to cut ties completely, but I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep putting myself in situations where I was made to feel like the villain for no reason. Going low contact with Mom and Rachel seemed like the best option for now. Just when I thought things had settled down, my phone rang again. This time, it was Mom. She said she wanted to meet in person to talk things out. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed. If nothing else, it would give me a chance to set some boundaries and make it clear that I wasn't going to let this happen again. Update 3. Mom wanted to meet at a local coffee shop, which I agreed to because it felt neutral enough. The idea of sitting down with her at her house, where she'd have the home field advantage, didn't sit right with me. When I arrived, she was already there, sipping a latte with that tight, forced smile she puts on when she's trying to smooth things over. As soon as I sat down, she started talking like nothing serious had happened. She mentioned how the coffee shop had great reviews, asked how my week had been, and then casually added, "I think we should just move past all this." It was like she wanted to sweep everything under the rug and pretend the accusation, the drama, and the discovery of the envelope never happened. I didn't let her set the tone. I made it clear from the start that I wasn't there to play along or let her minimize what had happened. I told her I was willing to listen, but I wasn't going to tolerate any gaslighting or attempts to shift the blame. Her smile faltered a bit, but she quickly recovered and started explaining. She claimed the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. She said she'd been stressed from hosting the party and overreacted when the envelope went missing. According to her, it was all a mix-up, and she never meant to hurt me. It was an explanation I might have accepted if it weren't for the part where the envelope was found in her purse. I pressed her on that. I asked her point blank how the envelope ended up there and why she was so quick to accuse me of stealing. She dodged the question at first, saying it didn't matter now because everything had been found. But I didn't let it go. I told her I needed to know the truth if we were ever going to move forward. That's when she slipped. She admitted that she'd suspected I might mess up again because of my past struggles with money and wanted to teach me a lesson. Her voice dropped when she said it, like she thought saying it quietly would make it less shocking. I sat there, stunned, realizing this wasn't a misunderstanding at all. It was deliberate. She went on to justify herself, saying she was only trying to protect Rachel's gift because Rachel deserved it after everything she's done for the family. Apparently, Rachel's hard work and sacrifices made her gift more valuable, and Mom didn't want anything to happen to it. It was clear she thought this explanation would somehow make her actions okay. I pointed out how hurtful and humiliating it was to accuse me, not just in private, but in front of the entire family. I reminded her that Dad, cousins, and everyone else were there when she implied I'd stolen money, and how even after I proved my innocence, she didn't back down. Her response? A vague, half-hearted apology. "I'm sorry if you felt hurt." That wasn't good enough. I told her straight up that an apology like that didn't mean anything. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. I started listing other times she'd treated me unfairly or compared me to Rachel, adding context to how this wasn't an isolated incident. Her reaction was defensive, as I expected. She accused me of holding grudges and said I needed to let things go if I wanted the family to stay together. Then she tried flipping the script, saying I was the one tearing the family apart by refusing to forgive her and Rachel. I stayed calm and told her I was stepping back from family gatherings until there was a genuine apology and a clear effort to change. I wasn't interested in continuing to show up for events where I'd be treated like the problem. That's when she switched to guilt tripping. She said things like, "This family needs you, and do you really want to break us apart like this?" It was hard not to laugh at the irony of her trying to pin the family's dysfunction on me. When it was clear that I wasn't budging, her tone shifted again. She started talking about how hard it was to balance family relationships and how she never meant to hurt anyone. But the damage was already done. I told her I appreciated her taking the time to meet, but unless she was ready to own up to her actions and make meaningful changes, there wasn't much else to say. I got up to leave, and she didn't stop me. As I walked out, I could see her still sitting there, stirring her drink like she was deep in thought. Maybe she realized how badly she'd messed up, or maybe she was already planning her next move. Either way, I felt drained. I'd said what I needed to say and made my boundaries clear, but it didn't feel like much of a win. If anything, it felt like the beginning of a much longer fight. Update 4. It didn't take long for the fallout from the coffee shop meeting with Mom to start. The next day, Rachel called me furious. She was livid about how I'd confronted Mom and accused me of ruining everything. According to her, Mom was devastated, and I was being dramatic over a minor misunderstanding. I let her rant for a while before cutting in to say that I wasn't going to participate in family gatherings until Mom took accountability. Rachel didn't take that well, accusing me of being selfish and making everything about myself. I calmly ended the conversation before it could escalate further. Later that evening, Dad called. His tone was more neutral, almost cautious, like he didn't want to step on any landmines. He said he understood why I was upset and agreed that what Mom did was wrong, but he wished there was a way to move forward without all the tension. I told him I wasn't opposed to reconciliation, but it had to come with a genuine apology and a real change in behavior. He didn't push back, but I could tell he wasn't happy with my stance. Meanwhile, Rachel took to social media again. This time, she posted a string of vague updates about how sad it is when people air family drama online and how some people thrive on conflict. She never mentioned me by name, but it was obvious who she was talking about. A few of her friends chimed in with supportive comments, which only fueled the fire. I ignored it, but one of my cousins sent me screenshots with a message saying, "This is so childish." Speaking of cousins, the extended family was starting to get involved. Aunts, uncles, and cousins began reaching out to me directly. Some offered support, saying they couldn't believe what mom had done. Others took a more neutral stance, urging me to forgive and forget for the sake of family unity. I explained to a few of them that this wasn't about one incident. It was about a long-standing pattern of favoritism and unfair treatment. Most of them seemed to understand, but it was clear not everyone was on my side. Rachel, in particular, was doubling down on her narrative. She started telling anyone who would listen that I was jealous of her relationship with mom and was blowing everything out of proportion to get attention. The golden child narrative was in full swing, and Rachel played the victim role flawlessly. I wasn't surprised, but it was still frustrating to see her twist the story. Eric, however, quietly reached out to me. He admitted that he'd noticed the favoritism for years, but had stayed out of it to avoid conflict. He didn't say much, but knowing he saw what was happening and supported me meant a lot. It felt like I wasn't completely alone in this. Then things took a turn when Rachel decided to take her grievances to the family group chat. She posted a long, emotional message blaming me for the tension in the family and accusing me of trying to tear everyone apart. It was dramatic and full of exaggerations, but it definitely got a reaction. The chat exploded with arguments, with family members taking sides and some even calling Rachel out for being manipulative. I decided it was time to share my side. I kept it simple and factual, explaining what had happened at the party and how mom had accused me without evidence. I also mentioned her confession at the coffee shop about wanting to teach me a lesson. That part seemed to shock a lot of people. The chat went quiet for a while after that, but it didn't take long for mom to jump in. She denied everything, claiming I'd misunderstood her intentions and insisting she never meant to accuse me of anything. Dad tried to step in at this point, asking everyone to stop the drama and move on. But his lack of firm support frustrated me. It felt like he was more focused on keeping the peace than addressing what had actually happened. I didn't respond after that. There wasn't much else to say. The extended family started to split into factions. Some openly supported me, saying they'd noticed mom's behavior before but never thought it would escalate like this. A few even vowed to confront her directly. Others sided with mom and Rachel, insisting I was overreacting and should let it go. It was messy, to say the least. In the midst of all this, I received an anonymous email from one of my cousins. They admitted they'd also been hurt by mom's behavior over the years, but had never spoken up about it. They shared a few specific incidents that mirrored my own experiences and encouraged me to keep standing my ground. It was validating to know I wasn't the only one who had dealt with this. As the days went on, I started to feel more resolved in my decision to enforce boundaries. The support from some of my family members, and even strangers online, helped me see that I wasn't wrong to expect accountability. If anything, it made me more determined to stick to my stance. This wasn't just about the envelope or the party. It was about years of being treated unfairly and finally saying, enough is enough. Whether mom and Rachel wanted to admit it or not, things were going to change, starting with me. Update 5. A week after the group chat drama had died down, I received something unexpected in the mail, a handwritten letter from mom. It was an old-school move, completely unlike her usual style of quick texts or long-winded phone calls. The letter began with an apology. She admitted that her behavior at the gathering was wrong and acknowledged that she had unfairly accused me. She wrote that she'd let her stress get the better of her, and that she regretted how everything unfolded. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. On one hand, it was nice to see some acknowledgement of her actions. On the other, I couldn't help but wonder if this was more about saving face than genuinely mending our relationship. Mom's reputation is important to her, and with so much of the family taking sides, I wouldn't put it past her to do damage control. Rachel didn't make things easier. Somehow, she found out about the letter and wasted no time dismissing it as a tactic. She told anyone who'd listen that I was tearing the family apart and that mom was only writing letters because she didn't know what else to do. It was classic Rachel, doubling down and painting herself as the victim. I mentioned the letter to Eric during one of our conversations. He wasn't surprised but said he thought mom might genuinely feel guilty. He pointed out that she struggles to express herself properly and that the letter might be her way of trying to fix things, even if it wasn't perfect. It gave me something to think about, but I still wasn't ready to let my guard down. Around this time, I started seriously considering a suggestion I'd seen online, family therapy. I brought it up to mom during a call, framing it as a way for all of us to move forward without constantly rehashing old arguments. She was hesitant, claiming that therapy wasn't necessary and that we should just work things out ourselves. But I stood firm, and to my surprise, Dad backed me up. He said therapy might actually help us address the deeper issues that had been bubbling under the surface for years. Meanwhile, the cousin who'd sent me the anonymous email reached out again, this time over the phone. They opened up about their own experiences with mom's favoritism and how it had affected them. Hearing their stories felt oddly validating. It wasn't just me who'd noticed these patterns. Others had been hurt by them too. As word spread, more extended family members began to rally around me. A few even called out mom directly, urging her to take responsibility for her actions. With enough pressure from dad and other family members, mom finally agreed to attend therapy. The first session was tense. Mom was defensive, especially when the therapist started talking about patterns of favoritism. She deflected a lot, saying things like, "I was just trying to keep the peace," or "I didn't mean for it to come across that way." But the therapist didn't let her off the hook. They gently but firmly pointed out how her actions had hurt not just me, but the family dynamic as a whole. Rachel, of course, resisted every step of the way. She dismissed the idea that there was any unfairness in how mom treated us and accused me of overanalyzing everything. It was frustrating, but I focused on my own journey. The therapist validated my feelings, emphasizing that setting boundaries wasn't just okay, it was necessary. Over the next few sessions, things began to shift. Mom started to open up, sharing some of her own insecurities and how they'd influenced her behavior. She admitted that she'd always felt pressure to keep the family together and that she sometimes took it out on me because I wasn't as easy to manage as Rachel. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the first time she'd taken a hard look at herself. The turning point came during one session when Mom broke down in tears. She apologized, not just a vague, half-hearted apology, but a real one. She acknowledged the pain she'd caused me, both at the gathering and over the years, and said she wanted to do better. Even Rachel looked caught off guard by the depth of her emotion. I wasn't ready to forgive everything in that moment, but it felt like progress. For the first time, I believed Mom was genuinely trying to change. It didn't erase the past, but it gave me hope for the future. Since then, we've been slowly rebuilding our relationship. I'm cautious, making sure there's accountability and open communication every step of the way. Rachel is still Rachel, and while I'm keeping my distance from her, I've noticed she's quieter about the situation now. Eric has been a quiet but steady supporter, reminding me that it's okay to move at my own pace. It's not a perfect resolution, but it's a start. For now, I'm focusing on the progress we've made and keeping my boundaries in place. If nothing else, this experience has shown me the importance of standing up for myself and the power of setting limits with even the closest of family members.